Muazu Koroma is being rushed to Uganda's Entebbe airport, to a private jet.
It was somewhat surreal at the time it was happening.
The plane is waiting to whisk him away to the United States. There, Koroma, one of the biggest wildlife traffickers in the world, will face prosecution for selling rhino horn and ivory. It's June 2019. Fish and Wildlife agent Sam Freiberg is waiting for Koroma at the departures terminal. He's biting his nails as the police car with Koroma inside pulls up.
What was interesting is we knew he had ties to the Uganda airport.
Sam and his fellow agent, Tim Santel, knew Koroma had bribed airport workers in the past. They'd help him smuggle out his illegal wildlife products.
I had my concerns.
The possibility of one of these minions launching an 11th hour rescue mission was on Sam's mind. And then, their worst fear. According to Sam, a security guard strolls over to the police vehicle and sticks his head in the backseat window.
And we were seeing this security individual leaning in and talking with Koroma.
Sam hurries over to the car.
And I said, why are you talking to Koroma? And he says, you can't take him out. He's staying.
Sam's like, even now, Koroma's still trying to get away?
Here we are, we're this close, right? And we're still getting ripples in the process.
Amara Sharif, the other head of Koroma's network, had successfully been arrested by this point. But their accomplice, Mansour Surur, had disappeared before he could be apprehended. Sam's thinking, surely we can't have two of them escape. So he turns to the security officer and says to him,
he's being removed, and these are the reasons why, and we have full support from your head of police and higher above him.
Eventually, the security guard does step back. Okay, go ahead. They open the door of the police car and usher Koroma onto a bus to shuttle him to the plane. I've seen photos of Koroma in this moment. His brow furrowed, and he's clinging onto some sort of leather strap, the way you might expect someone to hold onto prayer beads. His eyes are super wide, looking out of the bus window at the private jet. Perhaps it was sinking in. This is his ride to jail in the US.
Yeah, he looked scared.
They finally walked him on the plane.
The private jet starts rumbling down the strip. Destination, New York City.
It wasn't until we lifted off the ground that I actually believe that, we did it.
Once they were at cruising altitude, the agents had time for reflection. Sam looks back at Koroma in his plane seats. The person they'd spent years pursuing. The boogeyman.
He was a bad guy. He was evil. But when you're face to face with somebody like that, he's a human, and he slept most of the way. So it was a very quiet ride. I'm going to admit, it felt good. We caught him, take a deep breath, and we can finally relax. We slept a little bit too.
As they were making the 14-hour flight, little did they know the events that were yet to unfold. Firstly, almost exactly a year later, Koroma's fugitive accomplice, Mansour Surur, would inexplicably choose to fly back to Kenya for his 60th birthday, using his real passport. He'd be immediately arrested in an airport in Kenya and later extradited to the US. Wolf would eventually get a text message saying this man he spent years investigating had been captured, finally completing the set.
I was happy. I said, yeah, finally.
And then, years after Koroma's plane touchdown in New York, all of the major players in the enterprise, Mansour Surur, Amara Sharif, and Muazu Koroma, were charged with wildlife trafficking offences by the US federal government. The case against them was so strong that they all ended up pleading guilty. They were sentenced and sent to prison, largely thanks to Wolf's years of undercover work.
Successful case. Excellent proofs, recordings, videos.
Wolf went out to celebrate a job well done. The number of drinks he had, he can't quite recall.
Yeah, exactly. It was good.
Wolf was throwing back gin and tonics, and everyone else on their team was clinking celebratory champagne too. But their bubbles were about to burst.
I got mixed feelings.
That's because the consequences of the enterprise's actions seemed kind of inadequate. Mansour was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Sharif, 4 years and 9 months. And Cromer, just 5 years and 3 months. For perspective, if you're caught in possession of a few grams of cocaine in New York, you could get roughly the same sentence, up to 5.5 years. Cromer's network was linked to trafficking at least 190 kilograms of rhino horn and at least 10 tons of elephant ivory, millions of dollars worth, hundreds of animals, not to mention the fact that people suffer enormously as a result of this trade too.
Wildlife crime is not often seen in the same vein as other more traditional crime, and they really haven't caught up with the transnational crime that's happening around the world and the millions and millions of dollars that are being moved from country to country. And so our penalties are way too low.
When I met up with Wolf in his hometown, he told me he was happy because his part of the case was successful. But the length of the sentences?
What I'm angry about is the short-term sentences. These people kill animals, yeah? When the elephants are assassinated, and the babies are orphans, and they're not killed because they don't have tusks. So, did they give a chance to the animals? No. So why they give the chance to the criminals? Does the court think about that?
Others who worked on the case, like Tim, say something is better than nothing. And given the fact that corruption may have gotten in the way of Cromer going to prison in Uganda, perhaps nothing really was the alternative.
Our goal was to disrupt and dismantle the best we could that criminal organization, and I think we did that.
True. 3 kingpins taken out in just one operation. The enterprise syndicate was kaput. So, that's the happily ever after, right?
Unfortunately, taking out kingpins is not very effective.
Well, not exactly, according to experts like Van der Felberg Brown.
There are, moral, ethical, justice reasons why one certainly doesn't want the kingpins to get away with their crimes and reap the riches from the destruction of nature. But kingpins are surprisingly easy to replace.
And Cromer?
Yes, Cromer was replaced.
According to investigator Vincent Opiene, there's already a new kingpin in Uganda, a new Cromer.
It will always keep happening. Once a kingpin leaves, somebody else step up in his space and try to mobilize people.
It's an empty job because in the end, so much work, so much investment to arrest all these networks, and networks go down, and tomorrow it's another one. So it makes you feel, I don't know, empty?
I guess Wolf, in this way, is a bit like James Bond. No matter how hard he fights, every installment there's a new villain. But hearing all this, I'm kind of confused. Why does Wolf even do this job? If it's so hollow, so seemingly hopeless, and yet so high risk, what keeps him coming back?
The rush, the thrill, the danger. It's like you get addicted to it. You're always missing that. The next meeting, the next case, next bad guy. It starts to be like a drug. You don't want the small guy. You just want the biggest targets.
So, Wolf is still out there, even now, chasing after the next adrenaline hit. Maybe sitting at a bar somewhere, across the table from a trafficker, hitting the record button. But in one of my last conversations with Wolf, I'm like, what's the endgame? The final scene in the movie of Wolf.
The final scene? No dying in the end? No dying in the end, actually, you know? Could happen. Be like a happy ending. No Thailand happy ending, but normal happy ending. Just finishing the case, retire, and sit on the beach, catching some sun. Any beach catching some sun.
"2023, almost 4 years after this dramatic arrest and expulsion, we're in Uganda, bumping around in the back of a 4-wheel drive with undercover investigator Rex.
It's not good. You can tell somebody traffic Kampala is always terrible.
What we're doing is kind of like one of those celebrity home tours. Except the celebrity in this case is the imprisoned wildlife trafficker, Mwazi Kuroma. While dodging potholes in Kampala's southwest, we pass a commercial plot Kuroma apparently owns. The driver and Rex speculate its worth. At least $250,000 US, they say.
But he's a rich man, very rich. He has made his money.
Until finally, we bounce down a red dirt road, dust encircling the car.
We are going to where his official residence is.
At the end of the passage, you can see the tiled roof of a large house, peeking over a black fortress-like fence that's topped with barbed wire.
This one is his house.
At one point, Kuroma lived at this very place. Sitting here, Rex looks out the window, his eyes shining underneath a camo print bucket hat. Memories of stakeouts, of arrests, start flooding back.
When I reach here, it's like I feel like Kuroma is still around.
To Rex, it feels like Kuroma is some sort of phantom.
Yeah, it's a ghost.
Perhaps that's because Kuroma still haunts Ugandan investigators. When we were in Uganda, Rex was in the middle of a financial investigation, trying to see if these properties can be confiscated as proceeds of crime. But a case like this is rarely successful in Uganda. When we recorded this, Kuroma was due to get out of prison in just a matter of months. So, in this moment, Rex was wondering, would Kuroma return to Uganda, and return soon, to a comfortable life, with his family, in this mansion? While sitting in the back of this car and staring into the middle distance, a wave of despondency hits me. Did the Kuroma investigation even make a dent in all this? The crusade to stop wildlife trafficking? And if not, what, how, and who can stop it? This is the last episode of the season. Isn't this episode the one where I meant to tie everything up? Turn the issue of the illegal wildlife trade from some sort of tangled mess into a neat bow? If so, you've caught me. I'm failing. It feels like this situation is so unruly, so unstoppable, and the efforts to curtail it, dare I say, at times look pretty futile. But you know what they say. When your car's getting out of control, don't brake, hit the gas. I'm Runako Celina, and in this, the final chapter of The Wildlife, I do just that. I knuckle down, pedal to the metal, to try to figure out, is there a silver bullet? Is there a solution to this dilemma that is the illegal wildlife trade? So, from the teams at Luminary, Dream Crew, and Novel, this is episode 8, Whack-A-Mole. So, my mission: how do we rein in the illegal wildlife trade? first stop on my mad dash for answers. I'm putting aside the international levers of justice and continuing my investigation in Kampala, where I'm hoping to find some answers with the team at the Ugandan government's Wildlife Crime Unit in their secret headquarters.
Thank you.
The open plan office is like a hive of undercover operations. Each investigator staffs their own desk, where a mini drama plays out. In one corner, there's a briefing.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've come up with an operation.
In another, someone's covertly recording a call with a wildlife criminal.
You're not going to call me to meet another person that I don't know yet.
There's nothing to see carried on.
All the while, phones ping, ring, and buzz as tip-offs pour in. So, what am I doing in this sort of MI5 setup? Well, I'm here because of something the organised crime expert Vanda told me.
What is often far more effective, but more difficult for law enforcement to do, is to focus on targeting the middle operational layer.
Vanda spent years studying this problem and literally wrote a whole book on how to stop this illegal trade. And according to her, what's way more impactful than imprisoning wildlife kingpins like Chroma is the kind of constant work these investigators are doing. An ongoing game of whack-a-mole with middle-tier wildlife criminals, smugglers who move the products around, corrupt military officials who have access to seized wildlife products. The thinking goes, if these people are arrested, they can sometimes be harder to replace than a kingpin, and losing them is more destabilizing to the trade.
The law enforcement job is never done, but certainly disrupting the trade is useful.
So we spent a couple of weeks embedded in this office, while around 5 agents simultaneously coordinated investigations. I wanted to see how they worked, how effective their operations were, and what kind of challenges they're up against. Because they might just be one of our greatest hopes in this fight. I'm going to focus on one investigator, Robert.
My job title is Investigation and Intelligence.
Robert is a pseudonym, and we won't be using any real names for the undercovers. His investigation begins like all of them. He gets up from his desk, walks into a large room in the back of the office.
Morning, sir.
You okay?
And announces, I have a case.
This one is called Operation Identify.
He's explaining the operation to a technical advisor. There are 2 TAs in this office, both British, and perhaps not so surprisingly, they're ex-coppers. One's called
Mick.
and the other.
People just call me Rich.
The agents, like Robert, work for the Ugandan government. But these English guys were working for an NGO called Focused Conservation. It gets a lot of its funding from the US government. Their job is to guide the agents based on their experience coordinating international undercover investigations.
Personally speaking, let's move on. The Chroma case is old news. You're only as good as your last job.
So, Investigator Robert explains to TA Mick the cover story he's using with some traffickers he's hoping to arrest. He's telling them he's a broker for a rich Singaporean pangolin buyer.
Okay.
This is different from India or Chinese.
Yeah.
So they have that guy, maybe a Singapore man, has more money.
This is basically the same format as Wolf's job. These investigators pose as buyers to get the traffickers to incriminate themselves and eventually lure them to their arrest. But there is one major difference with Wolf's work. These operations often take days, not years. They're called buy and busts. They largely don't focus on the kingpins, but those lower down criminals Vanda mentioned. That's the kind of trafficker Robert is trying to take out. In this deal to buy pangolin he's telling Mick about.
Operation Identify is a live pangolin in Palabek. Palabek is in the northern Uganda.
Wait.
What, a live pangolin?
Live pangolin.
Okay.
The animal that the traffickers are trying to sell is still alive. And in fact, there might be 2 of them. It's a rare opportunity in this work. Usually the items agents are seizing are from animals that have already been killed. But here's a chance to return an endangered species to its natural habitat. And the traffickers, in Uganda, they technically could face up to life imprisonment. Sidebar, if you don't know what a pangolin is, It kind of looks like the spawn of an armadillo and an artichoke. It's the only scaled mammal on Earth. It's prized for its meat and those scales that are crushed up and used in traditional Chinese medicine. It's estimated that between 2000 and 2013, around 1 million pangolins were trafficked. They've earned the unenviable reputation, the most trafficked mammal in the world. So Robert lays out his plan. After the arrest, to release these live pangolins into the wild at the closest national park.
Do that.
Okay,
Cool.
sir.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, sir.
Robert returns to his desk and begins urgently preparing. It soon became even clearer why Robert felt this pressure when he told me his nickname, Pangolin Officer.
It is a love. I use that language. I have love for the animal.
Robert's affection for the pangolin grew when he learned about an anthropomorphic quirk of the animal.
When it is overstressed,
They appear to cry.
you can see the eyes as if somebody who is sad and is trying to cry.
Robert just loves these weird, emotional creatures. So he's worried. That's because pangolins usually survive only a matter of a couple of weeks in captivity.
They easily die. So if we don't take drastic steps to recover them, they die.
Robert knows the traffickers have had the pangolins for about 10 days, and the clock is ticking down on their survival.
Probably now 3 days. It needs quick attention to really recover them from the bad hand.
So Robert immediately calls the traffickers to arrange the buy.
Yes, hello? I'm intending to travel tomorrow.
He gets straight to the point. He's telling the trafficker, let's do this deal, and let's do it quick.
It has to be as fast as possible. You give mine, I also give your money. Then we separate.
Robert hangs up, then gets a $1,000 budget for the mission, which is practically on the other side of the country. Robert is pumped, ready, cash in hand.
I'm happy because I'm going to succeed. Yes. Yeah, I'm confident in getting them.
He's convinced. He's gonna save some pangolins.
Ready for action.
We couldn't go with Robert and his two-man team on the journey 8 hours north. These guys are the masters of cover stories, but a bunch of foreign journalists in regional Uganda, it would be hard even for them to explain. So we had a different idea.
And now it's recording. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Robert's team included a baby-faced investigator called Ryan.
You can see the lines. Is anybody out there?
My producer Saskia gave him the task of being the intrepid reporter recording their mission.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are very safe and calm. Your prayers as we head for the long journey.
Despite only having a crash course in audio recording, Ryan took to this task like a duck to water. And I mean literally about the water. As the team went on their day-long road trip, he also documented when they crossed the Kuruma Falls.
You can see the falls, you can see the water.
A stunning whitewater section of the River Nile.
It's a beautiful one.
Eventually, Robert, Ryan, and the driver land in Palabek, a rural place in northern Uganda. The place where these 2 live pangolins are supposed to be. When they arrive, Ryan interviews Robert about their game plan.
We move with 6 armed men and 3 detectives.
Oh, that is a good plan. So can we therefore presume that today's activity is going to be successful?
It is true.
All right, thank you very much.
While Ryan and Robert start arranging local police to help them on their arrest mission, we're back at HQ in Kampala, monitoring the operation through WhatsApp. Robert and Ryan have taken their places. Robert is in the meeting spot where the traffickers are going to join him. Hopefully, they'll come with the live pangolins too. Ryan is watching from afar.
As I am undercover, somewhere seated, waiting to observe the meeting.
It's quickly approaching the moment when Rich, he's the technical advisor, when his heart rate starts rising to the speed of a jackhammer. He hates the next part of an operation, the arrest.
That's the time when generally things go quiet. We're getting very close. I am, starting to bite my fingernails.
The fact is, despite a raid like this being a well-oiled routine, Robert and Ryan are in a rural area, an unknown place with unknown people, and unexpected things happen during arrests. People get hurt, or worse. This reminds me of Rich's favourite quote.
I think it was Mike Tyson who said, wasn't it, that, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
And what the sage Mike Tyson means in that quote is, you can prepare all you want, but you can never predict all the risks, which feels appropriate for what was about to occur. The hours passed. Robert was sitting and waiting at a dusty roadside spot, waiting to apprehend the traffickers and confiscate the pangolins. He'd been messaging with them all day. But then the traffickers stopped replying.
We have had a really tough time in this operation.
The traffickers, well, it's clear they're not going to show up. Rich says the team should leave.
Consider maybe withdrawing from where you are to a safer location. A lot of uncertainty now.
Oh yeah, thank you. We are planning to relocate.
We watch from the headquarters as the operation falls apart.
We are unable to be successful as we had planned.
A collective sigh fell in the office. Slumped. We all knew what this meant. When Robert returned to the office, he confirmed the pangolins would be dead by now.
I'm not happy because the life of those pangolins, I presume they have already killed it. It's very sad.
Robert has a theory about what happened. While in northern Uganda, after a briefing about the operation, a police officer made a call. He was speaking a local language that Robert couldn't understand, but their taxi driver could. The driver said it sounded like the officer was warning someone. Possibly he was in cahoots with the traffickers.
It failed due to the integrity of the police officers. He's corrupt, he's unfriendly, he's unethical. All those bad words I pour on him.
So Robert's operation came to naught, foiled by low-level corruption. And he wasn't alone. In the fortnight we spent in the office, the other half-dozen cases that were underway all either crumbled or were delayed, showing how delicate, how difficult it is to actually secure an arrest in this environment. I imagine the work of these agents to be like that cliched story of Sisyphus. It's the Greek myth where a man is condemned to push a rock up to the top of a mountain, only to have it roll back down to the bottom every time he reaches the peak. It seems endless. And when these officers are confronted with so many obstacles, so frustrating. Yet, Robert and all the investigators I met were so diligent and hopeful. But some good news. While this operation failed, Robert and Ryan did carry out one successful raid. It happened while out on their mission.
Team now setting off to Guru, where we expect pangolin skin.
While on the road, Ryan and Robert followed up a tip-off about someone selling a pangolin skin. It was less urgent because this pangolin had already been killed. But still, it was a chance to bring a trafficker to justice. Of course, Ryan documented everything.
Yeah, we are ready to act because the skin is there, so we are just ready to attack.
Robert enters a small, grass-thatched hut, typical of the Acholi people who live in northern Uganda. On the outside, it's like many of the houses in the area, painted turquoise with flecks of white, dark green and terracotta. But inside, an illicit deal begins. Robert, still undercover, haggles with the suspect. The woman says she has a pangolin skin, and she wants the equivalent of around $2,500 for it. This would probably be more than like a year's income for the average person living in the area. Eventually, Robert and the woman settle on a price lower than that, and she rifles around in the back of her home until she finds a burlap sack. She reveals what's inside: the scaled skin of a large pangolin. At this point, Robert calls, seemingly for someone to bring money, but in fact it was a signal to the team to make the arrests. Everyone, including Ryan and his recorder, descend on the hut.
So this is the home of the lady who has been found in possession of pangolin skin.
Inside her home, the woman sits on the floor. Her name is Vicky Attar. She's 41 years old and separated from her husband. She's in a simple teal floral dress with no shoes. There's a small child there and a woman who translates to the local language. Ryan turns to Vicky Attar and begins an interrogation by asking her to show him the skin.
Wow. Beautiful animal killed by you. And it is an animal for all Ugandans and all the entire community in the world. So, ask her again, did you know that it is wrong to have this thing?
She doesn't know.
Do you know the consequences of killing a wild animal?
That she doesn't know.
Vicky stays sitting on the floor during this examination. She's looking up, stunned, smiling at times. I think she's in shock.
Tell her also that this is an offense against the law of Uganda. So she is now under arrest.
Vicky is taken away by the police. Robert and Ryan feel triumphant. To them and their team, this is success. Back in the office in Kampala, I asked Robert about his impression of Vicky and why she may have become a trafficker.
She looks malnourished. She needs money to better her life.
Despite this, Robert says he doesn't feel sympathetic towards people like Vicky Attar, who are killing the animals that draw flocks of tourists and their foreign dollars to Uganda every year.
An animal has been killed. The animal which would have brought money for the tourists to go and see them.
But to me, the recordings of Vicky's arrest were unsettling. She didn't look like a hardened criminal, but simply a desperate person trying to support her family. I wanted to see what happened to her next. Which led me to court.
The woman is now inside court cells, so she will either plead guilty to the charges or plead not guilty.
Eventually, Vicky appears in the dock for her plea hearing. She's wide-eyed, emaciated, wearing the same dress she was arrested in.
Good morning. How is she?
The Chief Magistrate, Gladys Kamasanyu, explains to Vicky that she's been charged with a wildlife crime.
You have been brought to court charged with an offense.
That carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment.
And it's an offense of unlawful possession of a skin of a pangolin.
Vicky is blinking heavily as she says through a translator she didn't know it was such a big offense, but admits to having the pangolin skin.
But she's asking for forgiveness and she's sorry.
As Vicky apologizes, her big blinking eyes start to well with tears. She practically collapses.
Okay, sit on the chair. Sit there.
The translator tries to comfort her as cries ring out in the public gallery. People watch as Vicky breaks down. Vicky says her tears are because of her child, perhaps the one you could hear in the background of the arrest video, who's now home alone.
She's having I have a younger child at home.
It's okay to cry. Okay? So I have entered a plea of guilty.
In the end, Vicky Attar was sentenced to a fine of around $270. But she couldn't afford to pay it. And so she chose the alternative, a 12-month prison sentence. If a wave of despondency hit me when I found out about Chroma's fate, this is a tsunami. Surely arresting people like Vicky Attar can't be the solution. And her sentence seems grossly disproportionate to Chroma's. He sold millions of dollars worth of wildlife products, while Vicky tried to sell one pangolin skin. Chroma was sentenced to just over 5 years in prison. And Vicky got 1 year. That's 20% of his sentence, for a crime on an infinitely smaller scale. Of course, that's because Uganda's wildlife crime penalties are stricter than those in the US. But still, to me, in the world of the illegal wildlife trade, Vicky doesn't seem like the real enemy. Okay, lots of caveats here. Obviously, law enforcement has a duty to arrest someone committing a crime, regardless if they're rich or poor. And arrests do create a deterrent effect. Plus, this is just one of dozens of investigations the team has done, some which have taken out far more powerful middlemen. But for sure, Vicky wasn't one of them. And I kept asking myself, how many more Vickys are out there? Vulnerable people paying the highest price. My hand is basically plastered on my forehead at this point. But maybe I need to look in a different place for answers, beyond just law enforcement. So I kept searching. And there was one place in Uganda that seemed to have cracked the nut, which is the illegal wildlife trade. What on the surface appeared to be a kind of conservation utopia, which took us to our final pit stop in Uganda.
All right, ladies, welcome to Kihihi. On behalf of Airlink, we thank you for flying with us.
Deep inside the windy, impenetrable forest. The forest lives up to its name. It's densely packed with tropical trees. And to pierce the near-vertical ascent, you need machetes, walking sticks, and the cardiovascular fitness of a peloton instructor. I'm here because this jungle is where one of the largest remaining populations of mountain gorillas live.
Wow, look at the dominant silverback.
Including the gargantuan animal that's in front of us.
And he seems to really be in charge.
On the morning we hiked into the forest, he was munching on berries before sliding down a tree trunk, almost like a fireman shooting down a fire pole.
It's humongous. And that's what I love about seeing gorillas in the wild. They have a lot of dignity, and he's a proper boss.
He looks completely at ease traversing the forest floor. It's an idyllic moment, communing with nature. A reminder of the profound and transformative experience of being able to look into the eyes of a wild animal. Which was only briefly interrupted.
Yeah, gorillas love to fart.
My guide for the day is Dr. Gladys Kalema Zikusoka, but everyone around here calls her Dr. Gladys. She's the founder of an organization that's called Conservation Through Public Health. 40 years ago, mountain gorillas were on the brink of extinction owing to habitat loss, disease, war, and poaching. Up until not long ago, in neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo, there were even reports that baby gorillas were being poached and sold illegally as exotic pets. But thanks to people like Dr. Gladys, that doesn't happen in Uganda, and their numbers have increased substantially, though they are still endangered. Today, 20 gorilla families live in Bwindi, enjoying a more or less peaceful, if somewhat gassy existence. I was curious, how did people like Dr. Gladys achieve this? Protect animals in the face of so many challenges, including the illegal wildlife trade. Back at her lodge, I start talking to her about what's happening in Bwindi that's working. It turns out that Dr. Gladys is almost evangelical about conservation. Even her favourite song is Michael Jackson's most idealistic hit.
Heal the world,
Make it a better place.
Dr. Gladys explains to me that one of the threats to gorillas in Burundi are that people are often hunting other animals, like a bush pig or a small antelope called a duiker, and the gorillas end up accidentally being killed in their traps.
Sometimes it's a tradition activity that has been carried out. Their dad was a hunter, their granddad was a hunter, and they're continuing that tradition.
So how did Dr. Gladys and others solve this issue of poaching? How did they tackle this problem of, well, gorillas becoming collateral damage of tradition? We actually met someone who exemplified the issue, a former poacher who now takes part in what's called in conservation circles alternative livelihood schemes. We linked up with Robert Biagaba at a lush plot of land, a stream snaking around its perimeter. It's where he and other so-called reformed poachers take part in these initiatives to support themselves. That includes mushroom growing and beekeeping.
You can see the bees coming in and coming out from the beehives.
When we sit down, Robert tells me about his life before all this, how his family used to survive.
Our grandfather was a hunter, so my dad as well was a hunter. And as well, me, I was a hunter myself. And we could sleep in the forest, we could gather food, yams and sweet potatoes, and do the hunting as well.
This was what Robert's family had always done, until a fateful day in 1991.
Yeah, I remember very well, and I remember even the day.
It was the day the powers that be sanctioned Burundi as a national park, in recognition of the special protections needed for the area's extraordinary flora and fauna. Robert remembers it as a celebration.
The people came from Kampala, there was a barbecue.
But what Robert and whole communities of people like him didn't realize at the time was that this day would represent a seismic shift in life. On that day, hunting in the Burundi forest became illegal. Robert continued doing what he had done his whole life. But overnight, he was transformed into a poacher, into a criminal.
We didn't realize they are stopping us completely. We continued doing hunting again, until when we could meet the rangers with a gun, they ran after us.
To escape the armed rangers, 15-year-old Robert ran for 4 kilometers through the forest. He slipped and cut his knee. And lying there, he had the epiphany that his days hunting animals in the forest as food, something his ancestors had done for generations, were over.
When you are caught within the forest, they take you in prison and they charge you.
But then that raised the question, how was Robert and his family going to eat? The answer? Money through tourism. Robert ended up becoming a porter for bird watchers.
I could carry a telescope or a camera, and then at the end of the day, I get a tip.
These days, Robert's income comes primarily from the alternative livelihood schemes, the beekeeping and mushroom growing. Robert says it's been enough to support his family, so they don't need to poach, though they still struggle.
I get some money to pay my school fees for my children. I can be able to buy a small portion of land. Now it's better than the past, than the beginning.
It seems like Robert has been able to make it work, even without hunting. So, is this the answer? Alternative livelihood schemes? To find out more, I met another so-called reformed poacher.
Amazina ganje baranyita Mugayisurayiti umuhinji.
He's called Mugayisurayiti, a coffee farmer.
We stand in the middle of his sprawling coffee farm with our translator, Sharon. 67-year-old Mugayi Salite crosses his arms. He starts telling me about how his childhood spent hunting also changed abruptly after an intervention by a man named John.
He was a white, came and told them the dangers of poaching.
But this John didn't seem to be as worried about, the dangers of not eating.
After John had told them to leave poaching, they got scared and worried on how they will stay or live, because it was like a source of their living. And so within that period, now Dr. Gladys came, doctor buys the coffee, and then they get money, they buy meat to replace going to the park.
This is another alternative livelihood scheme. This one run by Dr. Gladys. It's an initiative called Guerrilla Conservation Coffee. Her organization buys up coffee beans from farmers who live near the national park at a steady, high price.
Just felt like it was the right thing to do. These people need a better livelihood. And if they get a good price for the coffee, then they won't have to go into the forest to look for meat.
If there was a sliding scale of care for animals versus care for people, Dr. Gladys' ideas seem to lie comfortably in the middle. All of her programs see the intersection between the two. Her organization provides access to hygiene products, hand-washing facilities, family planning services, and tuberculosis treatment to locals. Because if people are healthy, well, they also won't pass diseases on to the apes. Win-win.
Seeing that the numbers of gorillas have almost doubled because of our efforts, that gorillas are falling sick less often because community health is improving.
Finally, I felt like I was reaching some kind of conclusion. The sounds of cicadas lulling me as I feel a comforting sense of optimism glow around me. Can income generated through small businesses like the beekeeping and coffee farming be the secret formula for turning people away from poaching? It's something I felt all along. Give a fuck about people to give a fuck about animals. See, this fixation on one, animals, and not the other, local people, contributed to this mess in the first place. Of course, we have to try to get demand under control, stop people buying the stuff. But in the meantime, let people living nearby the wildlife have actual autonomy in their life. I know that people living in Burundi are poaching to eat the animals for sustenance, but I think the same model applies for people who sell the animals or their parts. For those driven to poaching through poverty, if they have legal options to make a living beyond killing wildlife, then hey, no supply for the kingpins and no supply for the market.
I believe the future for wildlife lies in the hands of people who live next to the wildlife. And we need to empower them to lead conservation efforts if the wildlife is to survive and thrive.
Finally, I was not just tying up all the loose ends of this quest, but weaving it into a beautiful dream for the future. This was the world peace I spoke about at the beginning of this series. Problem solved. Ha. If only it were that simple. The coffee farmer then tells me the amount of land he thinks you need in order to make enough money to support yourself from coffee.
The minimum acres should be 6 acres and above. But somebody has like 1, 2, 3 plantations, it can't do anything to change him from not thinking of poaching.
So how many of these coffee farmers don't have enough land to actually make a meaningful livelihood?
They are the majority, those who struggle, but there is no enough land for most of the farmers who want or who are yearning to grow coffee.
And yes, I know it's pretty much spilt milk at this point, but I can't help but wonder, why isn't giving land back to the people ever an option? Anyway, Dr. Gladys says land isn't so much of an issue as having enough capital to buy up all the available coffee. Either way, there's a very big speed bump in this utopian vision of uplifting people to uplift wildlife. Money and resources. And there's something more intangible that I feel is missing here. Heritage. Robert, the so-called reformed poacher, hasn't killed an antelope in many years, but he misses the cultural connection to the food that he grew up with.
So, really, those meat, those animals were delicious. I can still feel the taste of it.
Picture your mother's signature dish. Now imagine never being able to eat it again. Communities in Burundi have lost a lot for the sake of conservation and tourism, entire ways of life. Especially the Batwa people, who are indigenous to this forest, who were, hear this, forcibly expelled.
You could call them conservation refugees. They used to live in the park. It was their home. But they never used to kill gorillas. But they used to set snares for other animals. And gorillas could get caught in those snares. They were put on settlements. They found it difficult to survive without being in the forest.
See, the Batwa people have struggled since being told to leave the forest. PBS reported that 4 in 10 Batwa children die before the age of 5, and average life expectancy is just 28 years old. Reading and rereading this, I can't help but feel that this whole conservation utopia seems now to me to be a bit of a mirage. Dispelled when you see the fundamental injustice of people being forced to sacrifice their ways of life and having it decided by some external forces. Even Robert, who can no longer pass down the tradition of hunting to his son.
I wish I could taught my son, but since the park is written as a national park and the gorilla is now more important, we can't encourage now our son to do hunting. If the park wasn't gazetted as national park, if it is still allowed to go in the forest, my son also would start enjoying hunting as well.
I start scratching my head. I feel like I've examined this issue from every angle. The buyers, the investigators, the traffickers, the rangers. If the illegal wildlife trade and poaching were a pixelated outline to me before, now I can render it with Da Vinci-level detail. But I still feel no closer to any feasible solution, or even a mix of solutions. Of course, I'm not naive enough to think we'll stamp it out completely. People are gonna people. Buyers will keep wanting exotic pets or decorations or medicine. And traffickers will keep trying to make money through selling these things. But then I heard about a story that happened here in the Bwindi impenetrable forest that gave me yet another new way to think about this whole messy problem of the illegal wildlife trade. And stay with me, because this time, I finally felt like I got hold of a way to conceptualize a path forward. I'm going to tell it to you, twice, because there are 2 ways to tell this story. At its center is one of the most famous gorillas in Bwindi's history, Rafiki.
He was very relaxed. He was a very friendly silverback.
People were able to get up close to Rafiki in the wild, look into his marbled caramel eyes while he too looked back at them, causing tourists from across the globe to pause, snapping pictures and wonder, what's he thinking? He was a silverback, enormous, 25 years old. As the dominant male, he captained his furry troop as to when to eat, where to nest, when to move. Then, in June of 2020,
I found out about Rafiki from the warden. He told me that we've lost a gorilla, Rafiki. I was really shocked. And he said Rafiki has been speared. And so just thought, whoa, this is really bad.
Rafiki's body lay, surrounded by blood on the forest floor, a spear having pierced his internal organs. A brutal and tragic death of a beloved animal.
Everybody felt it because they really missed Rafiki. They were so sad that Rafiki had died. People are very annoyed with the person who killed Rafiki.
A manhunt ensued, leading to a suspect. A man found with several hunting devices, including rope snares, wire snares, and a spear. The court system was swift and decisive.
So he was put in jail for 11 years.
Justice for Rafiki. The news spread around the communities that surround the forest. Some months later, a female gorilla gave birth. The baby was called Rafiki Jr. because it was Rafiki's baby. The legacy of this beloved, slain gorilla lives on. The gaze of Rafiki immortalized through his newborn son. His father's killer, locked away. That's one way to tell the story. Here's the other way. Byamukama Felix was born not far from the Bwindi forest, in a village called Murole. For centuries, people in that area hunted. Like the other people you've met in Bwindi, for Byamukama Felix, the activity came to a grinding halt when Bwindi became a national park. Overnight, that way of life was criminalized. Tourism, that would now be the way to stay on the straight and narrow. In your own land, but perpetually in service to foreigners, taking them to see the gorillas, working in hotels, selling them your handicrafts. Then buy meat instead of hunting for it. That's the new order. People like Byamukama Felix adjusted, but life was hard. And then, during the pandemic, it got much, much harder. COVID-19 meant tourism evaporated, and the money vanished too. Bellies rumbled, and wives said, something has to give.
They admitted that we encourage our husbands to poach when there's no food on the table.
So Byamukama Felix, along with a few other men, dusted off their spears and snares and headed into the forest.
They're hungry. They want to feed their families.
In June 2020, Byamukama Felix laid a trap and waited for an unsuspecting animal to stumble into it. A bush pig, as it turned out. A fine meal for a hungry family. Byamukama Felix went to kill the bush pig. His spear is mid-air. But what he didn't see in his periphery was a 200-kilogram silverback gorilla. Rafiki.
The bush pig screamed, and Rafiki thought, they've come to attack my family. He charged.
In the panic, Byamukama Felix changed the direction of his spear. And instead of slaying the bush pig, he just about managed to save himself from the enormous silverback by killing him. With Rafiki dead, Byamukama Felix fled. He nervously hid in his home until he was sniffed out by the authorities. He confessed. He'd killed the gorilla, but in self-defense. He would spend the next decade in prison. I don't know how his family feeds themselves now. That's the other way to tell this story. And, I think this is the crux of what I'm left with at this, the final stop of this journey. The idea that when it comes to poaching or the illegal wildlife trade, what we're initially told is not always the full picture. At the end of this, I kind of see the world of conservation as different factions of a church, each with their own strongly held beliefs about how to resolve things. And there's one group saying law enforcement is the answer, another alternative livelihood schemes, others give rangers more money or buyers need to be educated. And while all of these cures have merit, there's always an if, a but, a however, a shortfall, an insurmountable obstacle, or a loser. And, well, maybe this is just the skeptic in me talking, but perhaps that's because conservationists need funding. And presenting a simple story and a simple answer is more appealing for donors. But look, let me squint and see the silver lining here, because perhaps this is a good lesson. That the only reasonable way forward is that when someone presents a plan to tackle this illegal trade, to not look at it from that single angle, but instead to take a panopticon view. I've been trying to do this all along anyway. Scrutinize every story we're told. Like that poachers are all evil, or the buyers are all in Asia, or that animals are the only ones suffering. Only then, I think, once we've challenged the stories, once we've challenged the stereotypes, once we swallow the bitter pill that is the messy and unequal reality of this, will we be able to make fair decisions that save animals and humans too. Otherwise, there'll always be a Byamukama Felix or a Vicky Attar losing out. Let me put it this way. To me, the narrative of the illegal wildlife trade tends to always be told as one of man versus nature. But I think it's actually a story of man versus inequality, man versus racism, man versus colonialism, man versus greed. But then again, this is my take, my narrative. And so I leave you in the soothing sounds of the windy, impenetrable forest to do just as I've instructed you and question everything, perhaps even what I've told you. The Wildlife is a Luminary original in partnership with Dream Crew, produced by Novel. It's written and hosted by me, Runako Celina. The series is reported, written and produced by Saskia Collette, with additional production by Julian Manigera-Patton and Jaco Tajevich. The executive producers are Maithili Rao and Max O'Brien for Novel, Coral Lee for Luminary, Drake, Adele, Future, Noor, Peter Nelson and Maggie Gilbride for Dream Crew, and Mauricio Gris and Alex Farquharson for Thread Studios. Research by Madeline Parr. Sound design mixing and scoring by David Smith. And original music composed by Jake Long. Music supervision by Nicholas Alexander. Production management by Cherie Houston and Charlotte Wolfe. Fact-checking by Dania Suleiman. Jamie Lines is head of creator and content operations for Luminary. The voice of Wolf is Ivan Ivashkin.